welcome to my channel. I'm here to talk to you today about Polynesian tattoo. My name is Roland. I've been tattooing here in Hawi, Hawaii for 10 years. I'm also an author on the subject. I've written 2 books, The Fundamentals of Traditional and Modern Polynesian Tattoo and Ana'ole Tattoo. The reason behind these videos really, they're going to be kind of an addendum to my books. They will roughly follow the same format, but the reasoning behind these videos is just to share the knowledge that I've accrued over the 10 years that I've been a tattoo artist here in Polynesia. I believe that it's very important that we remember the past. We remember where art forms originated from. What's happening now in Polynesia and throughout the world is that there's a renaissance really of this art form, and it is becoming homogenized somewhat. The different genres of Polynesian art is becoming kind of one collective form. And so what I really want to do is just to pay respects to the individual areas where these forms originated from, so that moving forward we know exactly what the hell is going on. Again, I'm not trying to say or be some type of know-it-all or have all the answers. I encourage feedback. I encourage you to contact me through my blog or my website, rolandpacheco.com, and just let me know what you think. Let me know any information that you have to share regarding Polynesian tattoo. So let's get started. The first thing we need to ask ourselves is, what is Polynesian tattoo? That's a good question. The first thing we need to do is to define Polynesia. Alright, so from the diagram you can see that Polynesia is actually a very large place. It consists of over 1,000 islands. There are 5 main genres or areas of Polynesia where tattoo is most prolific, and so I'd like to concentrate on those. These videos will kind of explain the importance and the reasoning and the styles of those each individual unique places in Polynesia. A lot of people think, when they go in and they say, oh, I want a Polynesian tattoo, that they're asking for one specific style of tattoo. And that's not necessarily the case, because each of those regions had their own importance and their own reasoning behind doing tattoos, and the styles were very different. And so I really need to impress upon people to understand those different styles when you're asking for a Polynesian tattoo, or if you're executing a Polynesian tattoo, if you're a tattoo artist. It's good to understand where these styles come from, what they mean, and the certain characteristics that they all have. So, let's get to it then. Hawaiian tattoo. Out of all the tattoo genres in Polynesia, Hawaii had the least developed of all tattoo. Meaning that they were still using very rudimentary shapes, triangles and squares and so forth, arranged in different patterns. The reasoning behind this was because, there's many reasons actually why Hawaii tattoo was considered devolved tattoo. But one of the reasons why was because Hawaiian society was stratified. There were classes of people, a hierarchy of nobility at the top, and then it kind of just fell away towards the bottom, or the commoners. And so what a stratified society does is it brings stability to that particular region, but it also marginalized people. And one of the groups of people that were marginalized were the kahuna. The kahuna were the priests. Kahuna were also tattoo artists, but the priestly function of a kahuna was to be a conduit between the gods and the mortals. And so really, when you have a stratified society like that, people stop believing in the gods. They start to believe more in their self and what they are capable of doing, especially when the chiefs began to claim that they were descended straight from gods, just like the Romans did. And this kind of broke that connection of spirituality, not necessarily saying that it wasn't evident, it was there, but the importance of it was really minimalized. And the rest of Polynesia was different. It was more of an open society. There was still stratification, there was still some classes of people, but it was much more rigid in Hawaii. And so the art form of tattoo and the purpose of tattoo really suffered as a result of that. It was never of great social importance in Hawaiian culture to have a tattoo, as it was in the rest of Polynesia. And some of that had to do with influx of visitors, people coming from the West, going through Hawaii and just really influencing the culture, and the culture being, like a sponge, and being that they saw these things that they really wanted to have. It kind of, changed the way that Hawaiian culture perceived themselves, and in that process, it changed the way that they perceived tattoo. So it was very common for Hawaiians to get tattooed with names of very, very influential and famous people like George Washington, Thomas Jefferson. They would get those tattooed, Jefferson or Washington, on their body to show that they were allied with these very powerful people. And so yeah, that was very unique to Hawaii. But again, we're talking about a very, very ancient culture. So I just want to point out again that I'm talking about ancient Polynesian tattoo, the things that happened several hundred years ago in Polynesia. So you don't have to worry about modern day Hawaiians running around with George Washington and Thomas Jefferson tattoos on them. That did not exist. We're talking about contact, pre-contact, which is about a little over 300 years ago. So, Tahitian tattoo. To the outside observer, many people considered Tahitian tattoo to be the prettiest form of Polynesian tattoo. And the reason behind that is because Tahiti at the time was a very highly trafficked area, meaning there was a lot of people coming and going from different parts of the world. And those people brought with them their fashion sense, the things that they wore, the things that they did, and so forth. And so that heavily influenced Tahitian culture, and in return that influenced tattoo. So the tattoo began to really take on these more textile forms, herringbone patterns, paisley patterns, flowers, and so forth that would be found on clothing were more or less what the Tahitian tattoo gravitated towards. And this is like in a general sense of just people getting a general tattoo. There was a cult class in Tahiti called the Arioi, and they were mainly people who of royalty, of royal pedigree, who had not married off into these familial unions, and chose to live these kind of hedonistic lifestyles, traveling the countryside, worshiping their god Oro, exacting payments from the population, putting on plays, and just kind of being a nuisance. They weren't very appreciated. But what they did was they had 8 separate classes within their cult, and each one of those classes was demarcated by a specific style of tattoo. And these tattoos followed more of the traditional Polynesian style. They weren't the floral kind of gaudy styles of tattoo, but they were more simple in those terms. And so the tattoo that those people chose to wear showed their place in Arioi society. And so this cult, like I said, consisted of upper echelon folks who were mainly, just trying to find their place in life, trying to find their purpose. They had not yet been, married off or decided to become an adult. So it kind of makes sense, if you think about it, in the fact that they were this younger type of society, cult within the society, and they're covered in tattoos, a lot like how things are today. So, another point of my videos is to point out that although things happened hundreds and hundreds of years ago, they are still happening today. Alright, so Samoan tattoo. Samoan tattoo is one of those styles of Polynesian tattoo that you immediately associate with Polynesia. When someone says, I want a Polynesian tattoo, it's generally a Samoan tattoo that they're talking about, or something like it. In the old days, Samoan tattoo revolved around the pea. The pea was a tattoo that started at your lower back and ended just below your knees. Now, this specific type of tattoo, the pea, had a very rigid construct, and everything about it had purpose and meaning, and it was very, very, very intricate. The problem with the pea was that it was extremely painful to endure the process. Once the pea began, it didn't end until it ended. So, as an individual receiving a pea, you had to be sure that you were capable of enduring the process. If you were not, then you shamed your family. Your entire ancestral line would shame. You were ostracized from society. And so, nowadays, a lot of people do not receive the pea for those reasons. And what they do get is the taulima, which is an arm piece. It's characteristics, very kind of tightly woven, intricate patterns conforming to the body, repetitive over and over again. And so that is more or less a bastardization of the pea. It takes much less time to complete, and it is not as painful. But the interesting thing about Samoan society was that they were the only culture, the Polynesian culture, that did not stop tattooing when the missionaries told them to. They would tattoo in secret. The rest of Polynesia, when the missionaries blew through and said, "Hey, you've got to believe in this one God. You've got to, stop dancing. You've got to straighten up and fly right." Everyone else pretty much capitulated and said, "Sure, we will do this." Samoans, being the defiant culture that they are, said, "No, we're not going to do that. We're going to tattoo in the secrecy of our homes, and so we're going to perpetuate this tattoo practice." And it is out of respect for the Samoan culture that I do not do anything resembling a pea, simply because of the fact that that tattoo style did not die out like the rest of Polynesia did. And you could really be offending people and really be stepping on people's toes if you were to just emulate a pea or any type of Samoan style that you saw in a magazine or in a book. This is my own personal preference. I'll leave it up to artists out there whether or not you want to go down that path. But me personally, I choose not to. And that's just more of a respect for the Samoan culture. Now, the pea itself and everything that came after that, the Samoan style of tattoo was very familial based, had a lot of family history, and so me personally, I do not like to infringe upon those traditions. Let's talk about Maori tattoo. The moko, facial tattoo. You might recognize that Mike Tyson has somewhat of a moko on his face. That form of tattoo is very easily associated with Polynesian art. The moko was more of a decorative expression and form of personal adornment than it had any political or cosmological meaning, which is kind of not in step with the rest of Polynesia. The moko was intended to really terrify and impress by its sheer form alone, and this was a very important part of Maori culture, was being able to just intimidate people. It did have familiar references as well. It had some reference to power and personal prestige, but generally it was one of those tattoo forms that was meant to just be a badass fucking tattoo. There are two different styles of Maori tattoo. One is an older style that is non-curved, it's much more linear. The newer style has a lot of curves in it and is very elaborate in its execution. Thigh and buttock tattoos were also very common. Moko weren't the only style of tattoo that the Maori performed. Again, the Maori women were tattooed, as were the rest of the women in Polynesia. Just for the sake of this video, though, I'm really talking through the male perspective, just because the female perspective, things get a little cloudy, and I will address that in later videos. But just to simplify things, we're just going to keep this on the male perspective at the moment. So Maori tattoo was perceived really as an act of defiance and acceptance of the person to his mortal imperfection. And Maori culture differed from the rest of Polynesian culture in the fact that the rest of Polynesia spent their lives trying to appease the gods in various ways, whereas the Maori kind of just resigned the fact that they were put upon this earth, that they were this kind of imperfect being, and they showed their defiance at their own mortality by marking their face in such a way. It was kind of a unique mindset. In other words, they believed in their own personal pedigree, their own lineage. That would afford them the protection that they needed as individuals. Whereas a lot of the other Polynesian cultures utilized tattoo to protect them outwardly from other things, from gods, from people that had a lesser power than they did. The Maori believed that their own pedigree and their lineage would afford them the protection that they needed from any outside harm. So they relied more on themselves in that respect. Marquesan tattoo. Marquesan tattoo is the most well-documented style of Polynesian tattoo that exists. That is because during the late 1800s, a German explorer came through the Marquesas. He was an accomplished illustrator as well as a photographer. He documented 200 individuals, roughly, and all their tattoo markings. He wrote down what their meanings were. He also studied the sculpture, the woodworking of the Marquesans, and he wrote 3 books about them. And those 3 books are what I base a lot of my research on. The thing about Marquesan tattoo that sets it apart from the rest of Polynesia, Polynesian tattoo rather, is that it looks very much like armor. There's a lot of sections to it. It's very modular, and that is because it is intended to act as armor. The intent of Marquesan tattoo really was to mimic the armor in, say, like a crab or a turtle or certain insects and so forth, because those insects and those animals were very highly revered. Because they did not need any extra protection. They wore their shells on their bodies. And I'll get into shells and the meanings of Polynesians, how they regarded beings as being encapsulated by a series of shells, but I'll get into that later. So anyway, Marquesan tattoo, very elaborate. Both sexes were tattooed, male and female. Females were tattooed at a very young age. And this was because the female's role in Marquesan society, ancient Marquesan society, was to gather food and to prepare food. And all the Polynesians believed that everything contained mana, it contained sacred power. Plants, animals, people, rocks, everything contained this spiritual power. And so in order for the female to go and pick a plant, to harvest a plant, and to prepare the food, they needed to have their hands protected in the form of tattoo. So that they did not steal or take away any of that power that existed in that plant or animal. And it also helped so that they could serve the food to the people that had tattoos. People that were not tattooed, that had clear skin, as they referred to it, could not really associate with people that had tattoos. So Marquesan society was an open society. It was stratified to some degree, but not to the degree that Hawaii was stratified. Marquesan society was very tumultuous. There's a lot of fighting going on constantly, and so the Marquesans really needed that extra protection of tattoo, being direct analog of the power of the gods from the heavens, bringing it to the world of the mortal, the blackness of where the gods reside, the Po, into the world of the light, the Ao, is where we live, and so the tattoo acted as that. The looks of the Marquesan tattoos were different depending on the regions that you were at. So southern tattoo looked different than the northern tattoo, but they were both kind of, they shared the same stylistic elements, but they were just more artistically varied depending on the artist. So again, the protection of the contagion of sacredness that permeated everything was the intent behind Marquesan tattoo. It was also important to create difference between people. People that had tattoo and people that did not have tattoo definitely had certain places in society. So the intention of Marquesan tattoo, therefore, is to create difference. So that concludes the first part of my video series, What is Polynesian Tattoo? In subsequent videos, I'm going to get more elaborate. I am going to spend much more time delving into the specific genres of Polynesian tattoo and how to create those tattoos. I'm going to get into the symbols used. I'm going to elaborate on that. And then I'm going to finally talk about appropriation, how I feel personally about non-Polynesians receiving Polynesian tattoo. Now, if I felt that that was something that was hugely important, I probably would have started off my video with that subject. So that'll kind of give you an idea of how I feel. Anyway, so thank you for your time, thank you for tuning in, and aloha from Hawaii.